Chapter 5. Do we run away or go in? A chance to meet the one you always knew was there. Whenever I encounter a party scene or see people drinking and acting like pure pagans, I can't help but like them. They don't play any religious games. They know who and what they are. The ones who irritate me are the ones who play games and pretend to be something they're not. Almost every time I pass by a bar or a nightclub, the crazy thought comes to mind. Lord, why not right here? Why don't you just break out right here? My definition of revival is when God's glory breaks out of the four walls of our churches to flow through the streets of the city. Revival of historical proportions in modern times would be when God invades the shopping malls on Friday night. I want to see every mall association be forced to hire full-time chaplains just to handle the crowds of people they find weeping under conviction each shopping day. I want to see citywide calls for volunteer ministers just to handle the flood of people who get convicted of their sins when they simply pass through the town. Security guards know what to do with shoplifters, but would they know what to do with people who come up to them in distress because they've been convicted of their sin? Hasten the day. I believe God has stirred such a pent-up demand for his presence that in the day of the Lord, if his people will pursue his presence, the existing churches will not be able to handle the explosion of lost souls wanting to be saved. The modern church is a caretaker or a maintenance organization at best, and a museum of what once was at worst. Our greatest problem is that we've stocked our shelves with the wrong stuff. We offer the hungry our dusty shelves of bland, man-produced religious ritual that no one in his right mind is really hungry for. Empty religious ritual is as appetizing as blue mashed potatoes or some other unnatural concoction. If anybody could ever open a store that just dispenses Jesus, the hungry masses would come. Perhaps the reason we haven't stocked our services with the right stuff is because it doesn't come cheap. The church today has made it to the halfway point in its journey across the wilderness. We're camped at the foot of Mount Sinai, much like the children of Israel in the book of Exodus. It is obvious that we have reached the point where we're going to have to make a decision. Will we go in or run away? Exodus 19, verse 3. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. This is New Testament language on the pages of the Old Testament. They were given the obvious option of leapfrogging to a new level of intimacy. Priests, not born of the earthly priesthood. That sounds like New Testament. We can be contented with burning bushes and rejoice over our first encounters with the supernatural God. We can be satisfied with the God-carved tablets of revelation and wisdom and all the other things that he does. But now we've come to a mountain of decision, the proverbial fork in the road. God has pulled us out of sin and out of the world. He has begun to make a people out of us. That's what the journey in the wilderness was all about. God was making a people out of no people. Peter wrote, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. 1 Peter 2:10. God took slaves and menial servants who had no education and certainly no self-esteem, and he planted his own character in them and placed his name on them. He pulled them out of Egypt and said, Now I'm going to make a people out of you. He was literally building a bride. The Lord brought the descendants of Abraham to the base of Mount Sinai, but it wasn't easy. When the multitude of people needed food, God wanted them to seek him for their bread. But instead they berated Moses and talked about how good it was back in Egypt, the place of their bondage. Nevertheless, Moses prayed, and God supplied quail and manna. The same thing happened when there was a water shortage. Instead of asking God or believing in his abundant supply, they immediately cornered Moses to complain and talk about the good old days in Egypt. God had something better for the children of Israel, but it was almost as if he was thinking, if I can just get them past this mountain, then I can have hope of taking them all the way. The sad and unfortunate truth in the book of Exodus is that the motley group of people God brought to Mount Sinai was not the group of people that he took across the river Jordan into the promised land. Something happened at the mountain. God called them and made them a nation for the first time in their history. He called them to a place of blessing and a place of change where they didn't want to go. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that this place was merely some physical spot on the map, because these people were already traipsing across the wilderness. Their blessing didn't consist of some rocky real estate someplace, although the promised land was part of the package deal. God called them to a promised place in him. He called them to a place of covenant, a place of intimacy with their Creator that was not offered to any other people on the planet at that time. That's the secret of the secret place. We think that the idea of a kingdom of priests is an exclusively New Testament or Christian idea, but it was God's original plan for Israel. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes. And be ready against the third day, for the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. He further said, When the trumpet soundeth long, they shall come up the mount. Exodus 19. Although the first generation of Israelites gathered around the mountain would ultimately believe the fearful spies and shrink from the promised land in fear, the real cause of their failure is found right there at the foot of Mount Sinai. God intended for all the Israelites to come close to him on the mountain, but they were uncomfortable. Exodus 20. And all the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, and when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. And they said unto Moses, Speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said unto the people, Fear not, for God is come to prove you that his fear may be before your faces, that you sin not. And the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near unto the thick darkness where God was. Exodus 20, 18 through 20. They saw the lightning and heard the thunder and shrank back in fear. They ran from his presence instead of pursuing him as Moses did. They were unhappy with the style of leadership that God had chosen. He couldn't lay down his identity as the Almighty God just to please man then, and he won't do it today either. So the end result of their flight from holy intimacy that day was that they died before they or their children ever entered the promised land. They preferred distant respect over intimate relationship. Smoking mountains and thunderings and lightnings wasn't what they'd bargained for. They would rather have Moses hear from God and them hear it secondhand. That's often the way it is when we have children and deal with them secondhand. Have you ever sent a message from you to another child through an intermediary child? They will say, Dad said you need to clean up your room. And the oft-rehearsed answer is, You're not the boss of me. And that's the problem in the church. Dad says things. One of the brothers, a pastor, an evangelist, a teacher, repeats what Dad says. And they look at that brother and they say, You're not the boss of me. Never understanding that those aren't the brother's words. Those are the Father's words. And it causes us to shrink back, and we find ourselves at a place of distant respect as opposed to intimate relationship. It wasn't God's original plan for the first generation of Israelites to die in the wilderness. He wanted to take the same group of people whom he brought out of the land of bondage into the land of promise. He wanted to give his new nation of former slaves their very own land and inheritance. But they wouldn't have it because of fear and unbelief. Their doom was sealed when they looked across the Jordan at the promised land and shrank back. But it really began when they shrank back from God's presence in the cloud on Mount Sinai. It was there that they ran from God and demanded that Moses stand between them. And the church has been suffering from the same problem ever since. We often prefer that a man stand between us and God. We have a hell-inspired, fleshly fear of holy intimacy with God. The roots of this fear reach all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve hid in shameful fear while God longed for sweet fellowship. Now let's look closely at your local church. I can almost guarantee you that some of the people in the congregation were there in the beginning, whatever that might be. Others came a few months later or several years later, and some are brand new believers or at least new arrivals. And God has brought all of you to the mountain today. You who were not a people have been made a people. God took all of us out of the slavery of sin. He's pulled some of us out of bad marriages. Others were delivered from the bondage of alcoholism and other chronic substance abuse problems. We've been delivered from joblessness and destitution, chronic depression, and too many other pits of hell to mention. In the end, we have all wound up together at the foot of his mountain, hearing his call to come closer. Now we face the same challenge as the children of Israel did thousands of years ago. Do we run away or go in? Into what? Into his presence. There's an air of expectancy and excitement in the church today. You probably sense that it's not too much further, as I do. Some scholars believe that when the Israelites stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, they were only a few days' march away from the Promised Land. The only reason they were delayed was because of their reluctance to press in to God. Their fear of intimacy sowed the seeds for fear of the enemy. And the same can be said of most churches today. I really sense that we stand at a critical crossroads today. On the one hand, we could say we've come too far to turn around now. But we could also say we're really tired. We want to sit here for a while. But the real question is, what does God say? I believe he wants us to grasp where we are at this point. He wants us to reach out and receive everything he has to give us for today. You and I are going to do one of two things from this point on. Number one, we will grow in relationship with him no matter what it cost us. Or, number two, we will turn back to where we came from and become a program-driven, meeting-going, organizing, committee-run church full of people doing all the good things that good people are supposed to do. We will end up fondly looking back on this time of decision and saying, those were the days. I don't know about you, but I don't want to grow old and look back with regret someday and say, oh, those were great days. Why should I, when we have come to understand that with God I can live in the present tense? I can walk in the freshness of what He has for me every day. I personally believe that our future is brighter than our past. If we dare to follow God today, then on some tomorrow we may be able to look back and say, I remember those years. That was before we had the great revival of His presence. Frankly, our future depends on our outlook in this hour of decision. If our outlook is, well, we've done pretty well, then this is probably all we'll do. But our future will look totally different if we say, thank you, Lord. Thank you for what you have done. I don't want to be ungrateful. But where's the rest? There's got to be more. Show me your glory. Satan's most successful trick is to get us to race to false finish lines. He works tirelessly to get us to stop short and say, we made it. He delights when he sees us fall or pull over to the wayside, only to notice at the last moment that the finish line is still ahead. The apostle knew of what he spoke when he said, I press toward the mark, forgetting those things that are behind. Philippians 3:13. We need to learn from the events at Mount Sinai. It was there that the Israelites built the tabernacle according to the instructions God gave to Moses. It was on Mount Sinai that God gave to Moses the great revelation of His law in the 10 Commandments. But other equally important things happened there as well. It was also there that a golden calf of idolatry was created. First of all, God revealed on Mount Sinai that He wanted to begin dealing with the people directly and personally. Until that day, Moses had always relayed to the Israelites everything that God said. That was a time of transition, a period in which God was saying, okay, it's time to grow up. I want to talk to you directly from now on as an entire nation of holy priests. I don't want to have any more intermediaries. I love Moses, but I don't want to have to speak through him to reach you. I want to deal directly with you as my nation, as my people.